You were kind, and they took advantage of it. You were honest, and it cost you the opportunity. You were generous, and they came back for more until there was nothing left. You gave someone the benefit of the doubt. One more time, always one more time. And they used it against you exactly the way every sign told you they would. And the worst part is not what they did. The worst part is what you did next. You questioned yourself. You replayed every moment looking for where you went wrong. You wondered whether you were too trusting, too soft, too naive, whether there was something broken in you that kept producing the same result no matter how many times you tried to do the right thing. There is nothing broken in you. The problem is not that you are doing good wrong. The problem is that you are doing good in a world that was not built for it, and nobody told you the rules of the world you are actually in. Think about what paying for your goodness actually costs, not in the dramatic moments, in the accumulated small ones. The promotion that went to someone less principled because you refused to play the politics. The friendship that drained you for years because you kept believing it would become reciprocal. The relationship where you gave more than you received and told yourself it was love, when it was actually the specific pattern of someone who had learned that you would not stop. The meeting where you told the truth and watched the room go cold around you, while the person who said what everyone wanted to hear got the credit. These are not random events. They are the predictable outcomes of operating with genuine values in environments that were not built to reward them. And the person who keeps experiencing these outcomes without understanding why will eventually arrive at one of two conclusions, both of them wrong. Either they conclude that they are the problem and start dismantling the values that cost them, or they conclude that the world is entirely corrupt and close themselves off from it entirely. Dostoevsky spent 4 years building a novel to show why both of these conclusions, however understandable, lead to destruction. The Idiot is not a tragedy about cruelty. It is a manual about something nobody wants to hear. That goodness without strategy is not virtue. It is a target, and the world you are living in right now has very good aim. This video will not tell you to stop being good. It will tell you something that Dostoevsky understood, and that most people who have paid for their decency need to hear before they pay for it again. Goodness without wisdom does not make the world better. It makes you a casualty of it, and you have been a casualty long enough. Prince Myshkin arrives in St. Petersburg after years in a Swiss sanatorium, treated for epilepsy, having lived among peasants and children in the mountains, largely outside the machinery of Russian society. He has no money, no connections, no social armor. What he has is a quality of attention to other human beings that everyone who encounters him finds simultaneously compelling and destabilizing. He is not naive. This is the first and most important thing to understand about him, and it is the thing that almost every summary of the novel gets wrong. Myshkin sees people with extraordinary clarity. He perceives their suffering, their pretensions, their hidden wounds, their performances, and the exhausted people performing them. He is not fooled by the social theater of St. Petersburg's drawing rooms. He sees straight through it. What he lacks is not perception. What he lacks is the capacity for self-protection that perception normally generates. In most people, seeing someone clearly, seeing their manipulations, their cruelties, their self-interest, produces a corresponding response. You protect yourself. You calculate. You adjust your exposure. You stop being available to what you have recognized as dangerous. Myshkin sees all of this and remains available anyway. Not from stupidity. From a kind of love that the society around him has no framework for receiving. This is why the world calls him an idiot. Not because he is foolish. Because he refuses to play by rules that everyone else has accepted as simply the way things are. Because in a society organized around performance, calculation, and self-interest, a person who operates from genuine openness is incomprehensible. And what we cannot comprehend, we dismiss. We call it simple. We call it naive. We call it, with the specific contempt of people who have made their peace with the world's corruption, idiotic. What Dostoevsky is showing us is that the diagnosis says more about the diagnosers than about the diagnosed. But here is where Dostoevsky refuses to be comfortable, and where the novel becomes genuinely useful, rather than simply moving. Myshkin's goodness destroys him, not because the world is evil, though the world in the novel contains considerable evil, because goodness without strategic awareness is not virtue operating at full capacity. It is virtue operating with one hand tied behind its back, in an environment that will use that limitation against it, without hesitation or remorse. Think about what Myshkin actually does throughout the novel. He gives money he cannot afford to people who do not need it, and will not use it well. He extends trust to people who have demonstrated they will betray it. He intervenes in situations where his intervention cannot help, and will certainly cost him. He loves people who are incapable, in their current state, of receiving the love he offers. None of this is stupid. Every individual decision makes a kind of sense. The sense of someone who is responding to what is actually in front of them, rather than to what a more calculating person would see. The problem is not any single decision. The problem is the cumulative cost of operating without the self-protective intelligence that the world Myshkin inhabits requires. You have done this. Maybe not at Myshkin's scale, but in the specific register of your own life, you have done exactly this. You helped someone who had already shown you they would not help you back. You were honest in a room where honesty was being used as a data point rather than received as a truth. You trusted someone past the point where the evidence made trust reasonable, because the alternative, becoming the kind of person who stops trusting, felt like a cost you were not willing to pay. And each of those decisions, individually, made a kind of sense. The cumulative cost is what you are still carrying. Here is the specific mechanism that Dostoevsky identifies, and that most readers miss entirely. Myshkin does not fail because he is good. He fails because he applies goodness uniformly. The same quality of openness, the same depth of trust, the same willingness to be present and available regardless of whether the person in front of him has demonstrated they can receive it. He treats every person as if they are capable of the best response to the best he has to offer. Some of them are, most of them are not, and the inability to distinguish between these two categories is not a feature of his goodness. It is its fatal limitation. The person who is genuinely good and also sees clearly does not offer the same thing to every person in every situation. They offer what the situation can hold. They extend trust proportional to the evidence that it will be honored. They are generous with people who have demonstrated they can receive generosity without treating it as a weakness to exploit. And they withhold, not from selfishness, not from cynicism, but from the accurate understanding that offering what someone cannot receive is not generosity. It is waste dressed as virtue. Dostoevsky is not saying that Myshkin should have been less good. He is saying something harder. He is saying that goodness, deployed without understanding of the environment in which it operates, becomes indistinguishable from self-destruction. That the person who is genuinely, deeply, constitutively good, and who has no strategic understanding of where that goodness can survive and where it will be consumed, that person is not a saint. They are a casualty. This is the distinction that changes everything, between being good and being naive, between decency and the refusal to see clearly, between genuine virtue and the performance of virtue that consists of ignoring what your own perception is telling you because the truth is inconvenient. Machiavelli would have recognized Myshkin immediately, and he would have said, with the particular precision that made him so uncomfortable to read, "This man is being destroyed not by his goodness, but by his ignorance of the world where his goodness is operating." And ignorance, however sincere, is not an excuse the world accepts. The relationship at the heart of the idiot is between Myshkin and Nastasia Filipovna, and it is the most precise illustration in all of Dostoevsky's work of why love, however genuine, cannot survive without understanding. Nastasia Filipovna is one of the most complex characters in Russian literature. She was taken advantage of as a young woman, used and discarded by someone with power over her, and has spent the years since building an identity out of her own destruction, performing the role of the fallen woman with such conviction and such fury that she has made herself untouchable through the very completeness of her self-negation. Myshkin sees her, really sees her. Not the performance, not the fury, not the destruction, but the person underneath it who was never given the chance to be anything other than what was done to her. He loves her with a completeness and a clarity that she has never experienced from anyone. He offers her something real, being seen as something other than what the world has decided she is. And it destroys her, not because his love is false, because it is true, and she cannot bear it. This is one of the most painful observations in the novel, and one of the most honest. There are people who have been so thoroughly broken by what the world has done to them that genuine love, love that sees them clearly and offers them something real, is more threatening than cruelty. Cruelty confirms what they already believe about themselves. Love requires them to revise it. And revision, at a certain depth of damage, feels more dangerous than confirmation. To understand why, you have to understand what it means to have built your entire identity around your own destruction. Nastasia Filipovna has organized herself around the belief that she is what was done to her, that the damage is not something that happened to her, but something that constitutes her. This belief is devastating. It is also, in a specific and terrible way, stable. It is a known quantity. It requires nothing of her except the performance she has already mastered. Myshkin's love threatens this stability not by attacking it, but by offering an alternative. And the alternative, the possibility of being seen as something other than the damage, of being loved not despite the destruction, but in full knowledge of it and without being defined by it, is more destabilizing than any cruelty, because accepting it would require her to become something she does not know how to be, something she was prevented from becoming, something whose loss is so old and so complete that reaching for it again feels not like recovery, but like a kind of grief she does not know how to survive. You may have met this person, you may have loved this person, you gave them something real, your honesty, your care, your genuine presence, and watched it make things worse rather than better. Not because you did it wrong, because they were not, in that moment, in that state, capable of receiving what you were offering. The love was real. The timing, the form, the specific way it arrived, these things landed in a psychology that had been organized over years of damage to reject exactly what you were offering. Myshkin's love for Nastasia Filipovna is real. It is also in the specific conditions of her psychology and his absence of strategic awareness, catastrophic. He loves her in a way she cannot receive. He offers her something she cannot hold. And his inability to understand this, his continued offering of what she cannot take, does not save her. It participates in her destruction. This is not a reason to stop loving. It is a reason to understand who you are loving and what they are capable of receiving. Dostoevsky is not saying that Nastasia Filipovna is beyond love. He is saying that the form of love Myshkin offers, unconditional, unstrategic, entirely present, arrives in a situation it cannot navigate. And love that cannot navigate its situation, however genuine, produces wreckage alongside whatever good it manages. So what does Dostoevsky actually propose? Because The Idiot is not simply a tragedy. It is not a novel that says, the world is corrupt, goodness is impossible, adapt or be destroyed. It is a novel that says something more precise and more demanding than either of those positions. The novel ends with Myshkin destroyed, returned to the Swiss sanatorium, his mind gone, the people he tried to love either dead or ruined. It is one of the bleakest endings in literature. And yet Dostoevsky does not present it as a verdict on goodness itself. He presents it as a verdict on goodness deployed without wisdom, in a world that will not protect it on its behalf. The distinction matters, because the alternative to Myshkin in the novel is not admirable. The calculating characters, the ones who understand the social game and play it without Myshkin's costly openness, are not happier, not more whole, not living better lives. They are simply less obviously broken. Their destruction is interior and invisible rather than exterior and complete. Dostoevsky is not saying, be more like them. He is saying being like Myshkin in a world like this one requires something that Myshkin does not have. Not less goodness, more understanding of where goodness can survive and where it will be consumed. This is the thing you already know from your own experience, if you have paid attention to it honestly. There are situations where your decency will be respected, and there are situations where it will be exploited. There are people who can receive genuine honesty, and people for whom your honesty is simply information they will use against you. There are rooms where trust builds something real, and rooms where trust is just a vulnerability wearing an optimistic name. The practice Dostoevsky points toward, without naming it because he is a novelist and not a self-help author, is the practice of reading the room before you offer yourself to it. Not withholding yourself permanently, not becoming the calculating operator who never risks anything, but pausing, before you extend the trust or the generosity or the honesty, to ask a question that Myshkin never asked. Is this person, in this moment, capable of receiving what I am about to give them? And is this room, with these particular dynamics and these particular people, a room where what I'm about to offer will be respected or exploited? This is not cynicism. Cynicism assumes the answer is always no and stops asking. This is discernment, the practice of asking every time, with genuine openness to the answer being yes, and adjusting your offering based on what you actually find rather than what you wish were true. The person who cannot tell the difference will pay, over and over, the same tuition that Myshkin paid. The person who refuses to try, who closes down, who becomes the calculating operator that the world seems to reward, pays a different price, the interior price, the price of becoming someone you would not have chosen to be. What lies between these two positions is not a formula. It is a practice, the practice of being genuinely good while seeing clearly, of extending trust as a deliberate choice rather than a default setting, of choosing decency with full awareness of what it will cost in a particular situation, and deciding with open eyes that the cost is worth it. This is not naivety. This is not cynicism. It is the only position that takes both the world and your own values seriously enough to live in the tension between them without either destroying yourself or destroying what you value. The question Dostoevsky leaves unanswered at the end of The Idiot, the question he spent 4 years constructing a novel around and then refused to resolve, is the same question you are carrying right now if you have ever paid for being good in a world that punished it. Was it worth it? Not in the abstract. In the specific. Was your honesty worth what it cost you? Was your generosity? Was the choice to remain decent in a room that was operating on different rules? Was that choice worth the outcome it produced? Dostoevsky does not answer this, and I will not answer it for you. But I will tell you what the novel makes clear. Abandoning the attempt makes everything worse. Not for the world will barely notice, for you. Because the person who decides that goodness is too expensive and closes down to protect themselves from the cost does not escape the cost. They simply pay it in a different currency, the currency of becoming someone who no longer recognizes themselves, who has traded what mattered most for a security that turns out to be its own kind of prison. Myshkin was destroyed by his goodness deployed without wisdom. The characters who survived him were diminished by their wisdom deployed without goodness. The only position that does not end in destruction is the one nobody in the novel manages to hold. The one that sees clearly and loves anyway, that understands the world's corruption without being captured by it, that knows exactly what decency will cost in this particular room with these particular people, and chooses it with open eyes. That position is harder than either naivety or cynicism. It requires more of you than Myshkin gave and more of you than his opponents were willing to give. It requires you to hold two things simultaneously that most people treat as mutually exclusive. The full, undiminished awareness of what the world actually is, its capacity for exploitation, its tendency to mistake gentleness for weakness, its willingness to consume what you offer without reciprocating it, and the equally full, equally undiminished commitment to being good within that world anyway. Not because the world deserves it, because you do. Because the alternative, becoming someone whose values are conditional on other people's behavior, is a form of defeat that is more complete than anything the world can do to you from the outside. Dostoevsky understood this from the inside. He spent 4 years in Siberian imprisonment. He faced a mock execution. He lived with epilepsy, with gambling addiction, with debt, with the deaths of people he loved. And he did not conclude that goodness was impossible or that wisdom required cynicism. He concluded that the two things, genuine goodness and genuine wisdom, were not opposites to be traded off against each other, but capacities to be developed simultaneously, at cost, over time, by anyone willing to pay the price of seeing clearly and remaining decent regardless. Being good in a bad world will destroy you, unless you are good with your eyes open. That is what Dostoevsky spent his entire life trying to say, and it is still, 150 years later, the most important thing anyone has said about how to remain human in a world that makes it expensive,